Welcome to another special edition of GEVA Live. This show series is a chance to work with our officials on various rule interpretations and rules that are different between the club, USA Volleyball, and even some NCAA and international feels and flavors here too. I'm joined today by three awesome officials, and the two topics we want to talk about in this segment are the idea of setting the ball in and around or over the plane, what is okay and what isn't. And we're going to look at rotations and why some things are called, why they aren't called, and why it's so hard to call teams in or out of rotation sometimes too. So we'll start with Daniel. So this idea of setting in around the plane, I guess we'll start with what do I mean as a coach or official when I say what is the plane, setting around the plane? How would you best describe that for somebody who doesn't know anything at all about volleyball or a very minimal part?
Usually when we talk about ball around the plane, we're talking about a part of the ball that is on top of the net or in that area where both the attacker and the blocker will have access to the ball, right? So the general rule is that no player is allowed to touch the ball on the other side of the net. That would be cause interference. There are so few exceptions to that. So if you're talking about getting the ball on the plane, we're talking about in the area where the ball is, part of the ball is on the net and is accessible to both, like I said, the attacker and the blocker. So if you have a setter that's setting the ball, and then your back row setter, for example, and you happen to contact the ball above the plane of the net, and then the ball travels to the other side, and that would be an illegal attack, a back row attack, right? Or if you are a back row setter and you're getting to trying to save a pass that is on the plane of the net, and the blocker happens to touch the ball into the setter that's above the plane of the net, again, that will be a back row block. So this is what I know that we're talking about, around the plane of the net. If the ball stays on the side of the setter, then, that the ball is accessible to the blocker and not accessible to the, accessible to the attacker and not accessible to the blocker.
Gotcha. So Londa, along the same line. So am I to understand that the idea is that the net goes up until infinity, and as long as any part of the ball touches that, then that's in the plane?
Yes. I mean, with volleyball, a lot of the rules that apply to back row players, involvement in plays, and or blocking and tacking in and around the planes of the net have to do with vertical planes and horizontal planes. So you have the horizontal plane, which is important in regards to back row players jumping and on the line or over of the tack line. They have to be in or below that horizontal plane. And then as far as the vertical plane, you have only specific mostly to the playable area and also the net itself. So the minute the ball breaks any part of that imaginary vertical plane, both teams have rights to play that ball. With high school, a player can reach beyond the plane of the net to bring a ball back onto their side as long as some part of the ball is still on their side. Again, once it breaks the plane of the net, both teams can play it. If it's the third team's contact and then the ball goes and breaks the plane and there's a joust, then that's actually a fault by the team that just hit it 3 times, because that would be their 4th contact.
Understood. Great. So Tim, along the same lines, and then we'll get to some of the weird situations with this too. Any difference in USA versus high school?
As if all this wasn't weird enough. A lot of times when we think of the plane of the net, it appears to people or seems to people that it would be that little tiny piece of the net, the wire that goes across all the way to the ceiling. But think of it this way. A ball is about 8 inches in diameter. So when that first 1/8 of an inch creeps into the plane, there's another 8 inches behind the plane, and then it travels through the plane. There's another 8 inches on the other side. So you can think of the plane of the net being 16 inches. Mm-hmm. The big difference with USA Volleyball is that a setter or an attacker has to play the ball within their plane of the net. So they only get to use the first 8 inches of that 16 inches. And what this results in is a slightly different technique in setting, particularly where in high school and college, players are allowed to reach into the plane, use all of that 16 inches. Our players need to be trained to go straight up along the net and intercept it before their hand gets into the plane, into that second 8 inches.
Understood. So Tim, I'll give you one of the, I guess, more difficult situations that comes up for referees, players, and coaches. Let's use a situation. A back row setter is setting the ball that's very tight to the plane, and a blocker blocks that set versus the setter goes to dump it over the net. What is legal in that situation? What do you guys look for, and how do you judge that situation?
We are trained to focus our vision directly from one antenna to the other. From the ladder, we're looking directly across the plane, and we look for some part of that ball to enter the plane of the net. Once that first eighth of an inch is in the plane of the net, it's a free ball. It's a 50-50 ball. Either team can play it.
Got it. Understood. So Sam, it really doesn't matter in regards to if it was a a back row or front row setter jousting, the situation still holds pretty much the same.
As far as blockers are concerned, when an opponent can block.
Understood. Yes. Good to know. All right. Thank you. So the next one then is rotations, and this is always a big one. In my opinion, probably one of the toughest things to call in the game. It takes a very well-skilled official, a very well-skilled coach, and it's a hard thing to understand too for, your general volleyball player. And I'll be honest and say most people in the stands, especially our parents, have no idea what good and rotations are, and that there's a lot of variations of these. So it takes a lot of time and development for everybody to be able to do this skill. So, I'll start with Londa on this one. What can you tell us about rotations? How R1s and R2s work together to call this? Is it a little bit different in high school when you have, a paid official, a certified official as an R2 versus, a student of the game, junior R2 with USA? So, Londa, what's your take on rotations?
I mean, rotations are hard for any officials, even the most seasoned officials. I do find an advantage of being a player because I'm familiar with the tendencies as far as patterns on serve receives. As far as R1 and R2 in high school and in USAV, the R2 watches the receiving team, the R1 watches the serving team. Upon the contact of the serve, that's when a violation can be called. As far as what's called, there's always been that little debate of should you give them a warning? Should you call it immediately? For myself as an official, I'd rather give a warning first, and not to mention if they're close. Yes, I get it. Generally, when they're close, that's the time that they usually know that they're out of rotation or trying to get an advantage. But I don't necessarily like calling it unless they're completely out of rotation. I don't like calling it the first time, but to each their own with each official.
Understood. So, Daniel, I guess my question to you on this regard would be, do you find variance and discretion based on the level of play? And do you find yourself maybe helping and working with the coaches a little bit more at younger ages and being a little bit more strict at the upper ages with this? Or, you try to stay consistent with this?
Definitely. The younger ages, if they are in the learning process, you kind of work with the coach and try to place them because sometimes they will lose themselves, whether they are front row players or back row players as you increase, as you go up in the levels. And the good teams, then you become a little bit stricter. So what you watch for is the tendency to overlap. My experience is that usually when the setter is in the back row, that's when you have the most tendencies of overlapping. So like Linda said, it's not an easy craft to master. It's I've had national referee who tells me that they actually still working on identifying rotation every single time. So it's not an easy thing to do. So me personally, I went from the technique of looking at opposites, the setter, the opposite of the setter, which player is opposite of the other of the player. I found that to be, I reacted that a little bit later because now I have to look at three different opposites. So one of the training that I went to, somebody told me, look at pairs, right? So you look to see who's pairing with the setter and who's pairing with the opposite. And that leaves you only the middles to look. So you look for the attacker with the setter and the opposite with the other attacker. Mm-hmm. So that tells me a little bit, the position. So that allows me to remember 4 numbers as opposed to remember 6, and I leave the middles around because about 90% of the time you have the middles with the liberals. So that tells me, that allows me to leave those alone. And I know the liberal will play in the back. So little tricks like that. So I'm not too strict unless there's an obvious overlapping, then that will be called. There's no warning there. When I see that they have a tendency to overlap a little bit, so I would warn the coach, I'm seeing your player creeping a little bit or trying to overlap a little bit, make sure that a part of the body needs to be in the perfect rotation with the player next to him. So that's kind of where I work with the coach when I see that. But the obvious ones, of course, if you're taking too much of an advantage, that will be called.
Understood. So, Tim, I do have 2 questions for you, and I'll let you, add your little bit first, and I'll ask questions. Is you have anything else to add? Any difference between how you approach on the USA versus club side as far as rotations go?
The approach is the same. I have a couple of questions for you guys. Both Londa and Daniel are outstanding referees. Londa, how long did it take you before you felt confident with rotation?
Well, I mean, honestly, for me, because I was a player as a setter and then libero, it was pretty easy. But, especially as R2, you don't have that bird's eye view like an R1. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have so much else going on with your game as far as what you need to pay attention. It does take a little. So like Daniel said, learn your setter, learn the setter on the opposing team, see who follows who in that order, because sometimes there's going to be an issue of wrong server, and now it's a matter of which team's out of rotation. But yeah, learn the setter, the opposite of setter, who the setter follows, and who follows the setter. Those are 4 people.
In terms of years, when you decided to become a referee, how many years would you say it took you before you felt confident?
Mastered, probably 3-4 years.
Daniel, same question.
It took me a while because I kept switching to see something that would work for me. Like I said, I would say it took me over 5 years to actually feel comfortable that I can follow rotation. And I'm being a little bit conservative by being 5 years. It's probably 6 to 7 years. And I'm only being
you're a coach. What on the junior side, what age group do you coach?
I've been everything from 15s to 17s, so it's been a lot.
Do most of your players understand rotation when they look at the other side?
Oh God, no.
Okay. I in my training, people feel incompetent. This is usually the last part of their game that comes. And when I'm coaching officials, I tell them that 5 years is a minimum before you begin to feel competent. Mm-hmm. And that turned out to be quite a long exercise for where I was going with this. We'll take your 17-year-olds, John, that are fairly sophisticated players. We ask them to be an R2 a half a dozen times a year, maybe 10. And I'm saying that a professional referee that really wants to dedicate themselves to the profession is going to take 5 years. So in the club situation, overlap is something that is hard to come by. First referee can help and coach. If the first referee sees something where there's a big advantage being taken, we can try and work with the junior referee and help her make a call, or we can make that call ourselves. But we try not to do that unless we see that some advantage is being taken.
Mm-hmm. So Tim, that actually alludes to both my questions, so I'll split them up. So you, in the USA version, have most of the time a junior R2. that might be a lot less experienced than most officials. So if I'm an R2 in that situation, if I think there's an overlap, do I whistle? Do I have to be 100% sure and we'll figure it out later? What would your advice be on when to blow that whistle?
A thought that I use before I get involved as a first referee, if I see a team that's out of position, I'll try and indicate that to the second referee. Most of the time that's unsuccessful. If wherever the player is out of position and the ball isn't being served to her, I am less concerned about it. But if they're putting a defensive specialist in the middle of the court when she should have been in either position 1 or position 5, I don't hesitate to call that if the ball is served to her, and they put her there on purpose, in my opinion.
So, and along the second lines of the situation was, we keep talking about this rule has that this word of advantage, that there must be an advantage gained, is a lot of the terms I hear with overlaps. When, I guess, or what is your interpretation of when is advantage gained? And is that just a personal, judgment call again? And how do you make that judgment?
Advantage is something we're taught not to call. If a person is out of position, the call should be made.
Okay.
And not that I'm admitting that sometimes we think in terms of advantage, but advantage could be a position fault where the setter is put closer to her spot, or a passer moved into a primary passing lane. If we see that we'd consider an advantage.
Fair enough. So I have to ask, obviously, and you kind of alluded to this answer already, is if my team is so out of rotation that it actually results in a disadvantage, is that out of rotation, or there's no advantage? No, you kind of already answered it, but we're in such disarray that we're going to lose the point anyway. Does it matter anymore?
Yeah, because that's a perfect time to make a call so that we can take a little time out and help you get everybody organized.
Fair enough. Good to say. All right. Yeah. Thank you for this segment. I enjoy all those responses. We thank you again here at GEVA Live. Have a great day.